Welcome. To accommodate this, I was diagnosed at age 44, and I've lived the majority of my life without proper supports, and my mental health has suffered greatly for it. This is part of an issue with autism studies and programs which tend to focus on the four C's: causes, cures, conformity, and kids. Well, children. But these approaches ignore large swaths of people who need services and supports. So, what treatments and interventions are available to provide services and supports to autistic adults? And this is why we're here. So, let's get into the topic for this video: autism therapies. Now, just to clarify, this video is not about transition programs for young adults who recently graduated from high school, nor is it about vocational rehabilitation programs. Both of these types of programs are available to all kinds of people and are not designed specifically for autistic people. I'm not saying that these programs are not helpful to autistics, because they can help a lot of autistics find employment. However, while that can be a life-changing service for autistics, I wouldn't classify it as therapy. Autistics are barely hanging on to life whether we're employed or not. And we are in perpetual survival mode because we are struggling to find acceptance and understanding at all. That includes acceptance from others as well as acceptance for ourselves. So I just wanted to make it clear from the start that I intentionally excluded programs like Project Search, Job Corps, transition services, and vocational programs, because this video is more about services marketed as therapies that help autistics live more healthy and fulfilling lives. Ideally, because autism is lifelong, there would be programs and services available to assist autistic people throughout their lives. However, there's a thing known as the services cliff, where the availability of services kind of drop off once an autistic person reaches adulthood. For those of us who are not diagnosed until adulthood, we don't experience the cliff the same way, because we basically aren't given any supports ever. The focus is usually on children, so those of us diagnosed in adulthood are just left without options. In my case, I spent months trying to find someone who could help me make sense of my condition. I had a therapist, a counselor, a psychologist, and a psychiatrist that I was working with to help me find resources and tools. And they helped me change my medications to take the edge off of my anxiety and depression. But of course, the side effects caused different problems. They tried to counsel me using affirmations and trying to convince me that my problems either were not anything to worry about or that I had to establish boundaries and cut ties with toxic people in my life. They also tried to teach me mindfulness techniques to help me stay grounded in reality and to accept the problems that I faced. And the biggest deal was they helped me connect with someone who could provide a formal autism assessment. Wonderful. I'd already diagnosed myself in 2020, but I still wanted the validation of a formal assessment. And I finally got that chance in 2021. Unfortunately, I didn't have the language to describe what I was really looking for. I thought I had made it clear that I needed to understand what it meant to be autistic, to understand what my sensitivities were, to learn how to stim, and to learn regulation techniques. But the diagnostician said I just needed more confidence. She told me, "You already know everything you need." And then she smiled as she handed me my assessment papers. It felt a little like this. The problem was, and still is, though to a lesser degree today, that I still don't fully understand my condition and how it affects me. I still don't have tools and techniques for regulating myself. I may have low support needs, but whether I needed many supports or just a few, it wouldn't really matter because it's the same either way. Either way, services and supports are practically non-existent. And you can research it on your own and quickly discover that autism research is focused mainly on understanding its causes and developing cures. But autism is nothing that should be cured. It's as ridiculous as trying to cure left-handedness. I'm not saying that the research has no utility. It's just that autism usually comes with a ton of co-occurring conditions, but which ones vary from person to person. But researchers tend to think of autism as the connection between all of these conditions, like some keystone that you remove to fix everything. And that's just not how it works. The right approach is to recognize autism as a valid difference and a variation in humanity, like when some people have spots or different hair colors and textures, and so on. The right approach is to accept people despite their differences and try to meet everyone's needs. And now, because every autistic person is different, there's no single one-size-fits-all treatment or intervention that meets every single one of our needs. And yet, when you look at the supports available to autistic adults, you find there really are only a few options. One, you get a list of services that aren't specific to autism at all. And these are supports for co-occurring conditions like anxiety, depression, IBS, and so on. And there's the typical resources you would expect, like counseling and medications. However, the counseling I was getting was from neurotypical people who couldn't really understand autism. That's not their fault, they just don't have the experience. Things are getting better in this regard, but it takes time. As a society, we're getting better at understanding autism and passing along that knowledge, but it's just going to take time to really get to everyone. A second option that you find is exercise, which everyone frames as some miracle solution. It's the snake oil of the day that promises to solve all your physical ailments. But this option doesn't work for all autistic people, as some may also suffer from palsy or asthma or heart conditions and more that makes exercise more difficult and sometimes dangerous. And maybe it's safe to say exercise in some form is good for everyone, but you can't prescribe the same exercises to everyone equally. We all have our own tolerance levels and physical issues to consider. And that's similar to the third option, medication, which comes with problems of its own. Sometimes medications are really only effective at addressing co-occurring conditions, but there's no way to treat autism through medications. It just doesn't work like that. Medications are goal-driven. They are prescribed in order to address a particular problem or issue. But autism is not an issue for every autistic person. Some people have more support needs than another. Autism is a difference in the nervous system, which can be expressed in a spectrum of ways. Besides, there's no ideal nervous system to strive for. So medication does not make sense for autism. A fourth option you see are accommodations being marketed as therapies, such as assistive technology, facilitated communication, time delay, video modeling, and visual supports. While these are helpful, they're really not therapies. They aren't treating autism. They're simply helping people communicate better with one another. And these types of accommodations are helpful for most people, not just autistics. This is something that educators encounter all the time. Some people are more auditory, so saying something multiple times is helpful. And some people are more tactile, so giving them something to practice is helpful. There's all kinds of ways to communicate and share information, but that doesn't mean it's a therapy for any condition. It's just accommodating all learning requirements. And I tried asking for accommodations in my last job, and all I got was pushback. I asked for clarity and to have information provided in writing, not just relay information verbally. I asked for more time to process information, as well as acceptance and understanding for my condition and my struggle to socialize. Nothing I asked for cost a penny. But maybe that was my mistake. Maybe if I had offered to pay for those services, I would have been given the accommodations I needed. I may never know. But ideally, these services should be free and automatically provided, just like wheelchair ramps are required in public spaces. These should just always be options for autistics, not secured behind a paywall. And yet, the expectation tends to be that we conform to the needs of the world, not the other way around. So, myself and many others have basically lived our entire lives without proper support. And it's sad because these really don't take much effort. But in my experience, the expectation is that we somehow overcome our differences to conform because the rest of the world can't be bothered to budge even an inch. Now, getting back to our 4 Cs, we talked about how causes and cures are not really viable options for autism. Let's talk about conformity and children. Now, most services and treatments related to autism are for children. This is why we have that services cliff that I mentioned earlier. And while the cliff is less than ideal, it does make sense to focus on kids, because the sooner autism is diagnosed, the sooner they can be given proper supports as the child develops. And helping children is a good approach if you want to avoid the majority of the problems that they could experience otherwise. I wish I had the same opportunities. And while I know I didn't have the same options available to me, I'm happy that they're available to others. However, I'm also quite aware that most of these services are offered to children because they are more easy to control and influence. After all, if you want a person to conform, it's best to condition them while they are young. If you are focused on changing someone's behavior, it's easy to do that while they are young. That's why religions promote teaching children, because once they reach adulthood, they've already accepted what they've been taught and therefore are less likely to question it. And yet, what do you think happens when the autistic child plays along, conforms to everything they've been taught, pushes through their discomfort for the sake of everyone around them, and then suddenly the supports that they've depended on their entire lives and become accustomed to are stripped away when they become an adult? Well, they end up in the same boat as those of us with a late diagnosis, which is they're left to their own devices. The hope is that they'll continue to behave the way that they've been taught, but without a solid understanding of why those things were taught, why they are supposed to work, and how they're supposed to help, the young adult is likely to slip into behaviors that just come more naturally to them. Without proper supports, they are still vulnerable to the unpredictable chaos that is the neurotypical world. Now, the largest category of autistic therapies available today is known as applied behavioral analysis, or ABA, which is a fancy name for psychological conditioning. I'm just going to let you know up front that, in my opinion, ABA is absolutely terrible. It's more than just teaching manners and etiquette. It's about decreasing aberrant behavior and increasing pro-social behavior through the use of conditioning. Now, admittedly, before ABA therapy came along, many children were either institutionalized as helpless, or they were tortured and killed, or just allowed to die. So compared to death or a lifetime of institutionalization and torture, ABA therapy, I guess, isn't so bad. But ethical scientists agree that ABA therapy is still a form of torture for autistics. It is compared to the brutal treatment for homosexuality known as conversion therapy. Now, therapists performing ABA will force eye contact, which can be quite uncomfortable and difficult for some autistics. They force sitting still and restrict stimming behaviors, which may be the autistic child's only way of self-soothing when they are distressed. Many use punishments, such as administering electric shocks, implementing restrictions, or withholding rewards and supports. And this is a strategy known as extinction, which is about stopping unwanted behavior. Unfortunately, it's considered quite reliable at eliminating unwanted behaviors. But what are unwanted behaviors? Well, they are definitely not behaviors the autistic person finds undesirable. They are any behavior that family or specialists determine are undesirable based on their own biases or society in general. Now, the desires of the autistic person are not considered, only questioned. ABA therapists claim undesirable behaviors include self-injurious behaviors, aggression, and pediatric eating disorders. But they're determining what is harmful, aggressive, and so on, not the autistic person. If the child is complaining about the food they are served, the parent or therapist could see the complaining as a problem behavior to be eliminated, so they frame it as a disorder regardless of how that food affects the autistic person. I mean, think about that for a second. The kid may be experiencing real pain and discomfort, and the therapists are more concerned about stopping the whining. I mean, this may sound like an exaggeration to many of you, but that was my real lived experience growing up autistic. I was often served foods that irritated my mouth and esophagus, and I would get sores all over the inside of my mouth and throat. And I was punished for complaining about it. A couple of times I was even physically beaten because of it. So I know this kind of thing occurs. And it's one of the many ways that ABA therapies are considered traumatizing for the autistic person. ABA therapy is not interested in the views of the autistic person. They're only interested in having the autistic person behave as intended. They even go so far as to teach the child the right way to play with a particular toy, because heaven forbid the child plays the way that they want to play. I mean, no questions are asked to understand whether the learned behavior is distressing or painful. It's simply asserted as the desired, acceptable behavior, and all else is to be avoided. It's conformity over care. It's conversion therapy for autistic children. Some forms of applied behavioral analysis include activity-based intervention, antecedent-based intervention, differential reinforcement of alternative, incompatible, or other behavior, discrete trial training, early intensive behavioral intervention, early start Denver model, extinction, functional communication training, naturalistic intervention, parent-implemented intervention, peer-mediated instruction and intervention, pivotal response treatment, prompting procedures, rapid prompting method SOMA, reinforcement, response interruption and redirection, self-management, task analysis, and verbal behavioral therapy. I can go on and on about the dangers of ABA therapy, but in basic terms, it's an attempt to erase the autism or hide it so that the child can pass as normal in society. But see, the child is normal. They are a normal autistic child. Hiding their true selves does long-term damage to their mental health. And ABA therapy has been shown to result in depression, anxiety, and PTSD at rates higher than those who are not exposed to ABA therapy. And yet it is still highly recommended by experts who are happy to condition your child for $50 to $150 per hour, or $17,000 to $100,000 per year. And over the years, they've learned to call it different things to either make it sound scientific or to avoid the stigma that naturally developed. Now, one point I need to underscore here is that the consistency of results are all over the place when it comes to ABA therapy. Determining which behaviors are desirable and which are not is completely dependent on the therapist and their biases. For example, if a young boy displays feminine characteristics, those could be considered manifestations indicative of later adult sexual abnormalities. There's no reliable ABA treatment option offering consistent results. but they want you to believe it is a reliable intervention for addressing behavioral concerns. In fact, they want you to believe it's most reliable for low-functioning autistics, particularly non-speaking autistics. But no matter what it's called, it's all simply torture and brainwashing. And just because the victim can't speak up about it doesn't make it better. Along the same lines of behavior management, therapists offer a wide variety of flavors. This includes behavioral management therapy, which is simply a wider category that could include ABA and therapies for other conditions such as anxiety, phobias, and more. In other words, it's just another way to refer to the same thing. Then there's cognitive behavior therapy. Again, the focus is on behaviors and changing behaviors. This therapy is specifically focused on changing negative thought patterns and behaviors to improve emotion regulation and coping skills. Okay, that sounds all fine and good. You know what also helps when a child becomes frustrated because they're struggling to communicate their needs? Listening. Listen to your kids. If they struggle to communicate, that's even more reason for you to try harder to understand what they're telling you. You don't just send them to a therapist to control their outbursts when they are yelling at you because you refuse to listen to them. The child is not always wrong, and families holding on to that stance are toxic. No amount of therapy for your child will get you to change your behavior, but if you did, you'd save both of you years of therapy. All you're doing is forcing them to push those feelings inside until they fester, and they will resent you for it. Educational and school-based therapies are just another way of saying the same thing, but the therapy is administered in a school setting. Joint attention, symbolic play, engagement and regulation, or JASPER, is a softer version of the same thing based in play, but I have to wonder if anyone is actually having any fun.
So what do I do? Just aim for the pond?
No, you're not supposed to hit it into the water.
But you hit it into the water.
I know I hit it into the water.
Well, why do they even have water if you're not supposed to hit it there?
Because it's fun! We're having fun! Ah!
Look, it went further than your ball.
Naturalistic developmental behavior interventions. It's the same thing, but doing it outside in nature. And occupational therapy is not unique to autistics and is more like an accommodation than a therapy. It's basically when a specialist helps provide assistance for daily activities such as cooking, cleaning, schoolwork, and more. Parent-mediated therapy. Same therapy, but taught to parents so they can administer the treatment at home. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Hey, Mom.
What? Sorry. What? Sorry. What? What? No. What?
Are elephants pachyderms or mammals?
What?
Physical therapy, again, is not specific to autistics. It's available to anyone who needs it. Physical therapy is when specialists provide assistance to improve physical activities such as range of motion, strength training, and physical function. Sensory integration therapy is about providing assistance with processing and understanding sensory information. This idea sounds like a step closer to a valid approach, but it has yet to be shown as consistently effective, and it still relies on the same torturous procedures as ABA. Okay, so that covers the majority of the behavioral interventions and therapies designed to change autistic children into neurotypical children. Again, they are intended to eliminate aberrant behavior and to build pro-social behaviors. But wait, there are more therapies for sale to help autistic children. Social skills therapies are focused on improving social skills by teaching social rules and etiquette that comes more naturally to neurotypicals. Now, this could actually make a difference in many autistic lives, not just children, but it's designed for children. And not only that, it's presented from the standpoint that the neurotypical way of doing things is the correct or right way to do things. And it can be quite disparaging for the autistic person, especially when there's very little explanation to go with it. If it's just presented as, this is the way you have to do things, because that's how it's done, that's less likely to work because it ignores the autistic person's need to understand. that approach is likely to cause more distress and masking, not genuine happiness. And that brings us to the real issue with social skills training. They are lessons in people pleasing. They are less about proper and effective communication and more about doing what is socially acceptable, hoping it will be helpful to the person to avoid bullying and abuse. In that way, these therapies are still more about victim shaming than they are about addressing root causes. And these therapies are naturally biased in their approach. Social skills therapies include developmental, individual differences, relationship-based, which is DIR, or sometimes referred to as floor time. Then there's modeling, relationship development intervention, scripting, social narratives, social skills training, social stories, social thinking, speech language therapy, structured play group, and treatment and education of autistic and related communication handicapped children, or TEACH. There are also several alternative therapies out there as well, but none of the following have been proven effective. In fact, some of these have been shown to be dangerous and harmful. And for that reason, I believe it's unethical to even be marketing these as effective treatments and interventions. I believe marketing these as such should be considered criminal. And yet, many desperate parents and caregivers are convinced that these are useful options, not realizing the damage that they're doing without any hope of achieving the goals that they expect. These alternative therapies include acupuncture, art therapy, chelation therapy, chemical castration, chiropractic care, creative therapies, electroconvulsive therapy, herbal supplements, hyperbaric oxygen treatments, intravenous immunoglobulin infusions, lobotomy, massage, mindfulness, music therapy, nutritional therapy, pet therapy, relaxation therapy, sensory-based therapies, vitamin supplements, and probiotics. Sounds like you just add the word therapy to it and suddenly it becomes a valid therapy. Peanut butter therapy, soccer therapy. It's ridiculous. So I've covered a lot of the programs and interventions available, and out of all of the available treatment options specific to helping autistics, most of them are based on changing the autistic person's behavior to meet the needs of society. That to me does not sound like support for the autistic person. That's putting conformity over care, when it should be the other way around. They should be more like the vocational and transitional services I mentioned at the beginning, which attempt to develop a person's unique strengths. And the ironic part of all this is that we might be happy to comply with neurotypical expectations if an explanation was provided for the target behavior. But behavioral-based treatments are often delivered without explanation. And they're simply asserted as the way things should be, and we're expected to just accept it no matter how painful it is for us. And to make matters worse, these treatments that are least effective at supporting the autistic person tend to be the most costly. Most places recommend a couple hours of therapy per week, up to about 100 hours or more per year to avoid burnout. But the fact that they can lead to burnout should be a big red flag. Considering each session can cost anywhere between $50 and $150, you can burn your child out for the low, low price of $17,000 to $100,000 per year. And that's with insurance. Without it, costs can range between $240 to $600 per day, which comes to about $20,000 per month. Actual costs are based on the frequency and intensity of the therapy that's required. But based on a study by UC Davis, health economists projected the national costs of caring for autistic people will be around $461 billion in 2025, with a chance of reaching $1 trillion. So basically, existing treatment options are expensive ways to force your kids into a mold that they'll never fit. It's throwing away your money and your child's authenticity in return for a puppet. It's paying someone to make things easier for you by making things harder for your child. And maybe that's because experts know as well as we do that nobody suffers from autism. We suffer from society's lack of acceptance and accommodation. We suffer from distress in our environment and the lack of support to reduce that distress. We suffer from the lack of support and understanding from others who are too quick to judge us, abuse us, and marginalize us. But apparently it's too hard to change the harmful behavior of the majority when we could simply erase the diversity of the few. And the saddest part is pushing for conformity is just part of the story. Until recent advancements in genetics, research into causes for autism were motivated by the possibility of discovering ways to prevent or cure it. And cures were sought after because they were considered more desirable to acceptance. In fact, acceptance was not even an option. It was not even on the table. Acceptance was considered in the same vein as surrender. So it was never even an option for many researchers in the past who were determined to save the children. And that lack of acceptance has resulted in decades of punishment and abuse of autistic people. Without acceptance, we are forced to conform with a hateful world, devoid of love, and without supports we actually need. From the beginning of our lives to the end, we are treated as damaged goods, undeserving of full integration into society. And even those who claim to care are more interested in changing us rather than understanding us. Even the diagnostic process is focused on looking for deficits, but does nothing to improve our circumstances despite determining we require support. Don't get me wrong, I am grateful for my diagnosis. It's given me permission to finally address my needs, but I still struggle with the lack of support and understanding of my condition. I've done my best to complete research and to listen to other autistics about their experiences to kind of piece things together myself. But does it really need to be this difficult? I mean, do we really have to choose between torture or figuring things out on our own? Are we really supposed to choose systemic abuse or be forced to rely on self-help books and autistic YouTubers? No offense. And as bad as supports and services are today, they're still better than they were 20, 15, or even 10 years ago. We've learned so much about autism in such a short period, including our ability to recognize and diagnose autism in women and people of color. And yet, the large majority of supports available are designed for children, and they're based on conformity and unproven, sometimes harmful services. Now, some of you may believe that these treatments have made a difference. You may think they've done more than force your child to mask for your acceptance. But ask yourself this: if these treatment options are so effective at treating autism, a lifelong condition, why stop these treatments after childhood? Why aren't they effective for adults? When it comes to having a different brain, treatment should not be about pretending your brain isn't different. It should not be about destroying our authenticity. It should not be about suppressing our thoughts or restricting behaviors based on the views of someone else. That's why we have the freedom in the United States to do as we please, but not the freedom to dictate what someone else should do. Of course, the exception is if the behavior is dangerous, but how is that decided? Who gets to decide what? And is it really dangerous because the majority of people are too afraid to see things from the autistic person's point of view? Should our rights to be our authentic selves be restricted by your limited understanding of our behaviors, especially if you can't be bothered to attempt to understand those behaviors? At the end of the day, there are tons of interventions considered to be services for the autistic community. However, the best intervention we could ever be offered is actually just listening to us when we tell you what we need. Stop trying to silence our voices. Stop trying to make excuses for not accommodating our needs. Stop trying to find ways to get rid of us because you can't be bothered to accept our differences. Respect our humanity, and our autonomy, because trying to change us or eliminate us is not compassion. It's ableism and eugenics. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please comment, like, and subscribe to see more content like this, or click on the video here to continue watching.